Innistrad is the first set in its namesake block, and with it comes a new plane, a new story, and the 56th expansion in Magic the Gathering history. The set came out on September 30, 2011, roughly a month before Halloween, which is relevant because the plane is a top-down designed, horror-themed setting and block, complete with zombies, vampires, werewolves, ghosts, and terrified humans. And what does it mean to be a top-down design set?
I really like the idea of using, a genre cluster, horror. That's something that people know, and there's a lot to work with. One of the nice things about top-down using, genre tropes is people are very familiar with them. People watch a lot of horror movies and horror TV shows and horror books, and so people are they know the things you're playing around with are stuff that people know very well. And so the thing that I approached the whole design with was saying, okay, I want to make a set in which the structure of the set matches the feel of the genre.
As for what the difference between a top-down design set and a bottom-up design set goes,
in a bottom-up set, the structure is all about the mechanics. But in a top-down set, you let the flavor guide the structure of the set. Meaning, if I took all the flavor off of it, I took off the art and the names, and I showed you the set, you would have no idea why it's together. Like, if you strip the creative elements in a top-down set, it just looks like it doesn't make any sense. Where if I strip the elements of a bottom-up set, you're like, oh, I get it. I see the mechanical thing you're doing here.
As for the story of Innistrad, you can check out the novel. Wait a minute. Crap, you know what? There is no novel for Innistrad.
When we started Innistrad, we had no idea what the story was going to be.
Though there is an art book that was released years after the set's debut that can be found for around $30-40 if y'all are interested. Instead, Wizards of the Coast let snippets of the story out via an augmented reality game, as well as a few short stories that could be found on the Magic the Gathering website. At least, they were until Hasbro/Wizards of the Coast redid their website in early 2023. Sorry about that. Thankfully, we did our homework, and we were able to put together this block-wide story summary for you. Thousands of years ago, on the plain of Innistrad, was an aging alchemist named Edgar Markov. Fearing death from old age, he was experimenting with ways to achieve agelessness not just for himself, but also for his beloved grandson, Soren. Famine began to take hold of the land, which made Edgar even more committed to his experiments. That's when Schildingar, a powerful demon lord on the plain, convinced the human alchemist to begin experimenting with blood. Taking the demon's advice, Edgar traps one of the plane's angels and exsanguinates her. The alchemist forms a concoction from her blood and, after learning secrets of sangromancy from Schildingar, formed a ritual that granted agelessness to those who took part in it, as well as the ability to exist on the consumption of another's blood. Quite literally, it turned Edgar and all those who take part in the ritual into vampires, a race that had previously not existed on the plane. Seeking to bestow the same boon upon Soren as he had himself, Edgar put his grandson through the same ritual. The experience proved quite troublesome for the Markov heir. The trauma of it all caused Soren's latent planeswalker spark to ignite. Once recovered from the ordeal, the now vampiric Soren departed the plane partially in disgust of what Innistrad had become. Time and time again, however, he would return to keep an eye on the happenings there. Over the course of his visits, he noticed that the vampires were pushing humanity towards the point of extinction. This caused Soren to figure out a way to save the humans and, in doing so, the vampire race as well. Using existing legends about the moon, he created a network of enchantments which could help protect the humans, and also create a symbol to be at the center of them. That symbol would be the Archangel Avacyn, a divine being of his own creation. With Avacyn in place, humanity began to survive and thrive in the darkness of Innistrad. Avacyn's creation, however, had an unintended consequence as, with the influx of such light into the plane, the forces of darkness also increased. Demons and devils came into corporeal form, and their numbers increased drastically. One day, Avacyn was challenged to a battle by the demon Griselbrand, whom had landed on the Hell Vault, a giant piece of silver that is presumed to be from the plane's moon, and, thus, considered one of the realm's most holy objects. He did this as an act of defiance. The battle took place out of the view of all but Avacyn's host, Micaeus the Lunarch, the highest-ranking clergyman in the Church of Avacyn. As the battle met its climax, Avacyn decided to trap Griselbrand within the Hell Vault. As she began to cast the binding spell, however, the demon impaled her through the heart using her own spear. This caused the spell to backlash and Avacyn to be pulled into the Hell Vault along with Griselbrand. Micaeus and his bishops quickly covered up Avacyn's unintentional imprisonment and temporarily succeeded in diverting the public's attention from her absence. Unfortunately, Avacyn's disappearance would have catastrophic repercussions throughout Innistrad, as the protective wards and faith-based magic her followers employed became increasingly weaker as time progressed. Darkness began to engulf the plane once again. The spirits of the dead began to linger on the plane more often and became even more violent than before. The dead rose from their graves, and legions of undead began wiping out outlying villages. Werewolves and vampires began slaughtering humans at an ever-increasing pace, and demons and devils became even more commonplace than ever before. It was about this time that two insane siblings, the mad scientist apprentice Geralf and his necromantic sister, Giza, launched their attack on Thraben, one of Innistrad's largest human cities, with their armies of undead. While they succeeded in overtaking the outer ring of the city, and even in killing the Lunarch Micaeus, their zombie army was ultimately destroyed by the Church and its forces, thanks to the quick actions of the Cathar Thalia. Meanwhile, Liliana Vess was also in Thraben, busily searching for information about Griselbrand, as he is one of the 4 demons she struck a bargain with after the nature of her Planeswalker spark changed, in order to ensure her immortality and power. Unfortunately, as she would quickly learn, the only person who knew where Griselbrand is, Lunarch Micaeus, is now deceased. She gains access to Micaeus' corpse and, using the power of necromancy to bring him back to unlife, she learns the whereabouts of the demon. Quickly, she makes her way to the Hell Vault, supported with a modest force of summoned ghouls. Unfortunately for Vess, though, once she arrived, she found herself surrounded by the forces of the Hell Vault's guardian, Thalia. Finding herself unable to destroy the Holy Monument and release her demonic target, Liliana instead cast a spell that would wind up forcing Thalia to destroy the very thing she had sworn to protect. With a wave of her hand, Vess made Thalia's men paralyzed and, thusly, unable to defend themselves from her army of ghouls. Liliana then gives Thalia an ultimatum. Either she will destroy the Hell Vault, or her men will be killed. Thalia took a moment to ponder the decision, but the strangled cry from one of her men forced her hand. Disappointed, Thalia pointed to the Hell Vault. Knowing she had won, Liliana nodded and completed her mission. Cracks immediately began to appear and spread across the surface of the Holy Monument. A moment later, it shattered completely. As it did, a brilliant golden helix shot skyward. It was the Archangel Avacyn, finally free from her prison. Griselbrand, too, was freed, as were many other demons and angels who had been previously trapped within the relic. As for Griselbrand himself, he made a beeline for his lair. Vess followed in pursuit. Shortly after Avacyn's return, a massive surge was felt in what remained of her protective wards and holy magics, and flights of angels returned, seemingly in numbers more than ever before. Once again, humanity began pushing back against the darkness that had spread in Avacyn's absence. It was also around this time that Liliana trapped Griselbrand to his lair. After a brief confrontation, she drew power through the chain veil that she had previously liberated from the rogue plane of Chandalar, and cast a spell that destroyed the demon outright. 1 down, 3 more to go, until Vess can claim herself for her once again. And that, more or less, covers it for the story of the Innistrad block. As for the set of Innistrad, though, there is far more to tell.
The story of Innistrad actually goes all the way back to Odyssey. Odyssey was another set that I led, and it had this graveyard theme. It followed Invasion, which had a multicolor theme. So we were starting to do blocks that had a thematic draw throughout the whole block. And I liked the idea of graveyard as a theme. And when we were done, I remember having this conversation with Brady Domermuth, who at the time wasn't even on the creative team. He would later lead the creative team. And he said that what they had chosen to match it with creatively didn't make any sense with what the set was. He's like, you had a set all about the graveyard. Shouldn't it be like a gothic horror set? Like why, that the horror genre made a lot of sense with the graveyard. And he and I really, said, yeah, that would have been a better choice. And I sort of said, well, what if we did that? What if we did a set that was like a horror-based set that took the genre of horror and really used that as this impetus?
Innistrad's gothic horror emphasis established, the set, and really the block as a whole, makes extensive use of horror tropes such as werewolves, zombies, vampires, and the number 13. But it goes beyond that by utilizing real-world inspirations such as The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, and classic B horror movies like The Blob and so on.
Starring Steve McQueen and a cast of exciting young people.
We just made a giant list. We said, okay, we're doing the horror genre, gothic horror specifically. What would people expect? And we wrote giant lists of things. And one of the things we wrote is just tropes. Like, what are famous classic tropes from this? So, for example, one of them is the idea of, the scientist that turns into a monster. We got Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We got The Exorcist. We have The Fly. We have vampires turning into bats. What is everything that's a trope that comes from this that we could make a cool thing?
Innistrad, however, was not Wizards of the Coast's first foray into gothic horror themes. In fact, the set Homelands from 1995 dabbled in the genre. Interestingly enough, for just a moment, Wizards considered making a new set based in Homeland's setting of Olgrotha, before settling on creating the then new plane of Innistrad instead.
So Homelands is interesting. What Homelands was is the team that made it looked at the data they had from Alpha, meaning, okay, what were the cards people seemed to like in Alpha? And they made a world built on that. Now, one of the things people like was Singer Vampire, so they sort of blew out Singer Vampire. And so that component of the set definitely had a horror vibe to it. It's about vampires. But the set also had this angels, because Sarah Angel's popular, so Sarah was there. It had Minotaurs, because who in Minotaur was popular? So it had a lot of components. And when we made Innistrad, one of the questions Brady actually asked me, he said, we could make this Olgrotha. We could just, instead of making a new world, we could go back to Olgrotha. But as we went back and looked at Olgrotha, there are a lot of component pieces to it that don't, like the vampire part fit perfectly in what we wanted to do. But the Minotaurs, there are a lot of other things that didn't really fit. And we're like, well, if we make a brand new world, we don't have to make sense of the things that don't make sense. We could just build what we want to build.
Innistrad features graveyard and tribal mechanics, with the set's 5 main tribes each being split mostly between 2 colors. Spirits in white and blue, zombies in blue and black, vampires in black and red, wolves, both feral and were varieties, in red and green, and humans in green and white. In terms of keyword mechanics and whatnot, Innistrad has a nice selection both new and returning. First off, Flashback, which originated in Odyssey and made a return in Time Spiral, comes back. Then there's Fight, which is a new keyword for an old ability that had been used for years prior on cards such as Arena and Tongarth, Tallroom Hero.
Fight goes back quite a bit. We'd had cards early in Magic that sort of, like the idea of a fight was, that when I attack and you block, what if we can make that outside of a combat? And we tried to do it a whole bunch of different ways. And finally, we sort of centered on the cleanest, easiest way, which is, look, we can just make up a term and that says, that thing you do in combat, well, you do that now. And so Fight just happened to premiere in Innistrad. It's not particularly tied to Innistrad. It's just like, it was the right time and place for us to keyword it.
Innistrad also introduced the new ability word Morbid, which signals that a spell or ability has a different or additional effect if a creature had died at some point earlier that turn. And finally, there's Transform. It's an ability that changes what a specific card is and does. And, to do that, Innistrad also introduces a new Double Face card that, instead of the traditional Magic card back, it has a card's transformed front. And because of that, Wizards of the Coast included checklist cards with the traditional Magic card back in booster packs, so that players can mark which double-faced card they will be using, should they be playing with clear sleeves, or no sleeves at all.
Tom Lapilli, was a member of my team, had worked on Duel Masters. So it's a game that we make for the Japanese market, a trading card game. And they had double-faced cards. And so he said, well, how about that? How about, I know we can print it. We were doing it for another game. What if humans was on one side and on the back side was the werewolf? We played with all of them. I was a little skeptical when Tom first pitched it, but my rule of thumb is try everything. You know, you never know what's going to be the exciting things until you play it. It ended up being the coolest thing. And so the way double-faced cards originally worked was you had a single-faced card that went in your deck. And then you cast that card, and that card went and fetched the double-faced card that acted kind of like a token, and you put it on the battlefield. The problem was, at the time, we didn't, when we went to the printers to say, okay, these new cards have to be in the same pack together, they said, well, we can do that like 90% of the time. And I'm like, oh, well, that's not good enough. And so from there, we said, well, okay, we'll just print the double-faced card. And we did some research, and like 90% of people play with sleeves. And so I said, okay, we came up with the checklist idea of, well, if you don't have sleeves, you can play the checklist card, but otherwise you can just, play them in your sleeves.
A new enchantment subtype also makes its debut in Innistrad: Curses. Curses are aura enchantments, but instead of enchanting a creature or other permanent, it enchants a player and grants them a detrimental effect.
Curses actually owe their origin to Unglued. In Unglued, I played around with the idea of enchant player. Because Unglued, well, a lot of what you do with the unsets is like, what is something you like that we've done before but we haven't done, and like, oh, you could enchant things. So what could you enchant that was kind of weird and different? And I'm like, oh, what if you enchanted the player? So I always, in the back of my head, I liked enchant player, and I'd been looking for some place to sort of bring it, into sort of, normal Magic outside the unsets. And we had this idea when we were talking about what do you expect to happen in a horror film. The idea of curses came up, and the idea that things get cursed. And so we talked a lot about it, and I said, oh, I've always wanted to do this enchant player. What if we married this flavor with enchant player? So the idea is I enchant a player, and then I curse them. Something bad's going to happen. And so the idea was I put it on a player, and then it grants the player some negative quality. And so something, it's hurting them in some way. And we ended up, one of the big questions was, I really wanted to be a subtype curse, but the rule at Wizards is, at least was back in the day, that unless it mechanically matters, you can't make a subtype. So I said, so I so badly wanted curses that I made 2 cards that cared about curses. I think 2 cards ended up in the main set. I think there's a witch and there's something else. So anyway, we made some curse matter stuff so that we could do the subtype of curses.
In terms of cycles, Innistrad features 5 rare flashback cards, each of which carry a very expensive flashback cost. Allied flashback cards, which have a flashback cost in a color that is allied with the card's actual color. Enemy flashback cards, which have a flashback cost in an enemy color. Allied utility lands, each of which tap for 1 colorless mana, but have a second activated ability involving an allied colored pair. And enemy colored tap lands, each of which producing either color of an enemy colored pair, but come into play tapped, unless its controller already controls a land with a basic type that shares a color with it. Also, these enemy-colored tap lands finish up a 10-card mega cycle with the allied-colored tap lands that were introduced in Magic 2010. In terms of notable and valuable cards, Innistrad has a nice selection and includes such noteworthy cards as Bloodline Keeper, a popular vampire tribal card that not only can create its own vampires, but, once transformed, can also provide a sizable buff to them all. Delver of Secrets, which is widely played in aggro-controlled tempo decks, and can be quite strong as it transforms from a 1-drop 1/1 into a 3/2 flyer, sometimes on the very next turn. Garruk Relentless, the first ever double-faced Planeswalker in Magic. It's also the first Planeswalker card to have 5 loyalty abilities. Geist of St. Traft, a powerful early-game creature that can protect itself through its hexproof ability, and can hit hard thanks to it creating 4/4 angel tokens whenever it attacks. Laboratory Maniac, a card that allows you to win the game if you have no more cards left in your deck, rather than losing the game. Liliana of the Veil, which instantly became one of the top Planeswalker cards ever printed thanks to its ability to shift the game in your favor through discard and board control. The card is a modern staple and is also seen on the Legacy scene. Parallel Lives, an enchantment that doubles the number of tokens as they are being put into play, and Snapcaster Mage, a defining card that had a big impact not just in Standard at the time, but still today in Modern and Legacy. The final Magic Invitational prize card to be printed, it was made by and bears the likeness of Invitational winner Tiago Chan. But there were also other cards that were planned for the set that had to be cut for one reason or another. For example,
the plan was we were going to have one double-faced Planeswalker, and it was going to be Arlen. There were only 2 slots for Mythic Rare for a double-faced card. We planned to make one of them a Planeswalker. We loved the idea that it was a werewolf because it was double-sided. But then when they started building the story, Garrett gets cursed by Liliana, and it was just a perfect opportunity to show mono green Garrett and then cursed green-black Garrett. And so Garrett took the slot that Arlen had.
Thankfully for Magic players and werewolf fans alike, Arlen would finally get her own card when Magic returned to the plane of Innistrad in the set Shadows over Innistrad. And while we're on the topic of single cards, Innistrad's pre-release promo was the rather underwhelming double-faced card Mayor of Avabuk / Halpak Alpha. Likewise, the set's release promo was yet another double-faced card, Ludovic's Test Subject / Ludovic's Abomination. Innistrad Game Day participants were handed a full art Diagraph Ghoul. Top 8 Game Day finishers were awarded a full art foil Elite Inquisitor. Innistrad's buy box promo was the card Devil's Play. And while the overall reception of Innistrad's assorted promo cards was lukewarm at best, the reception of the set itself was anything but.
People ask me all the time, what is my favorite set? And often I get asked, what is my best set that I've ever done? Innistrad is in contention for both those honors. I have a really warm spot in my heart for Innistrad. I think the finished product is one of the best Magic sets we've ever made. Eric Lauer was the head developer for that set. Eric did he and his team did a great team. My design team, I thought we did a really good job. And so I think the end result of that set was like one of the sets that came as close to being as perfect as it can be. I really like Innistrad. I feel lots of pride for Innistrad, and I think Innistrad really sort of paved the way for what top-down sets were.
So is Innistrad one of your favorite all-time Magic the Gathering sets? Love it or hate it, let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. If you would like to support Magic Untapped and see more videos like this, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, go ahead and pop a buck in our tip jar on Patreon. Thank you for watching.